Greetings. Hey, thanks for joining us here on the Business of Agriculture podcast. It's me, your host, Damian Mason, with a friend of show. You've seen him before. His name is Andy Ambriole. He's an organic farmer in Indiana, not too far from me. And he's been on the podcast before. He's going to join me today as we talk about a subject that you probably have an opinion about if you are in the business of agriculture. It's about educating the consumer. We hear it all the time. We hear it at all of our ag events, and we are told it's right up there with, you know what we need to do? We need to educate the consumer. And it's right up there with, you need to tell your story. These are things we say a lot, and we'll tell you why it's time for us to change the curriculum in educating the consumer. So that's what Andy and I are going to be talking about today. And by the way, we're not against educating people. It's just that we need to kind of discuss what that really means. Before we get to Andy and this subject, I want to remind you that this podcast is both audio, wherever you pick up your episodes, SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever, and it's also available as a video on the Damian Mason channel. Go to YouTube, type in Damian Mason channel, and please hit subscribe. The Business of Agriculture is brought to you by Harvest Profit, a software solution for your ag enterprise. You can go to harvestprofit.com and see if this is going to be a fit for you. You can even get a 14-day free trial. All right, Andy Ambriole, welcome to the Business of Agriculture.
Well, thanks for having me.
And if you're watching this, you'll see he's in his truck. Like all hardworking young farm people, he was out there loading trucks today, and he's at a remote farm that's 20 or 30 miles from where he actually his home base is. So he said, yeah, I got some spare time here, and he wanted to join me.
Yeah, today's payday, so.
Today's payday. That's the thing. When you're loading trucks, that means money is coming in. So people always get excited about planting. It's like, yeah, that's kind of cool. It's spring, you know, the sun's coming out. All of us ag people get really excited about planting, but the real fun time is harvest, because then it's actually bring in the bounty, and then, you know, the money's coming then too. All right. I wrote an article about this, educating the consumer. Mr. Ambriole and I have had a discussion about this previously. You tell me what your problem with it is. Educating consumer. There's probably a few things. And no, we're not against keeping information out there. We're not against telling our customers about what we do. But what's it mean when you hear it said?
Well, yeah, usually it means different things to different people, but usually it means trying to get everybody else to agree with me. And usually that doesn't work too well. So we kind of go under the guise of educating the consumer, but at the same time, we're just trying to give everybody our own viewpoint and not necessarily putting ourselves in the consumer's shoes. I don't know any other business that doesn't aim to serve the consumer without, we as farmers, we kind of tend to serve ourselves and our own self-interest.
Yeah, so here's the thing. I've been to conferences, obviously a lot. I write books and deliver speeches, etc., about ag. And I'll go to these conferences, and at many of these conferences, there'll be some person that gets up on stage and says, well, we're just going to educate the consumer. And I, a lot of times, have people talk to me that say, hey, Damian, you're doing a really good job educating the consumer. I'm like, wait a minute. If it's me saying, hey, here's the problem with the supply chain. Like I shot a video last spring. It got really good action because I talked about, you wonder why there's going to be meat shortages in the grocery while they're also, you know, burying pigs in Iowa. Here's why. And I explained the whole problem with the processing plants, et cetera. That is educational, and it's not condescending. Sometimes when we say educate the consumer, it means, by God, I'm going to go out here and do what I do the way I've always done it, the way my dad did it. If you don't like it, go to hell. Grow your own food. Thank a farmer. That's what we think sometimes is educating the consumer. Am I right?
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. It's just, it can be one-sided. Now, the interesting thing is, you know, we're a couple generations away from pretty much everybody having some tie to agriculture, either, you know, uncle farm, dad farm, grandpa, whatever. But, you know, we're probably 2 generations away, and there is a huge disconnect with consumers to farmers. So we need to fill that gap, but at the same time, we need to meet consumers where they are, not where we are.
You take words right out of my mouth. I said that in the article that I wrote, because here's the thing. It's not that we are against informing the customer about what we do or the beautifulness and the bountifulness of what we do. You know, I all the time talk about it in my book. I said, This is the amazing accomplishment. Until 100 years ago, scarcity defined food, even in North America, where we're certainly better off than Ethiopia. But now the consumer has a hell of a lot of choices. And so we used to say, let's just tell them how lucky they are. Well, there's that. But also, we used to sort of use educate the consumer would mean I'm going to use this as a reactionary defense of why I do what I do. Yeah, you may not like it, but here's why we're doing it. And that's educating the consumer. I think our bigger opportunity is to accept the fact that they've got a whole bunch of choices and that's not going to go away. Um, there's Whole Foods, there's Trader Joe's, there's food online, there's food delivery methods, there's small companies that are producing just about anything you can imagine. And so food with a cause, there's all this kind of thing. I liken it to your cell phone. Everybody listening to this podcast right now, in fact, many of them are using their smartphone, and you're either watching it or listening to it on a smartphone. You expect that your phone is going to have connectivity, unless you're in a really rural part of the country. You expect that you're going to have access to your apps. You expect that you can check the market prices on the Chicago Board of Trade or the CME group, as it were. You expect all these things. Now, what about when then someone says, well, you know what? Here's how that phone was made. Here's where it was made. Is that what we're doing when we say we're going to educate this? The consumers down the road on this, man. They're like, yeah, I think it's neat that you guys are in agriculture, but I've never been without a signal. I've never been without the Facebook app. I've never been without access to the CME website. We're kind of like over here thinking that it's still a novel thing. We got to tell them how we produced the phone, and the consumer don't give a damn. The consumer's saying, I don't care how you produced it. I just want to use it. Is that the right comparison?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. And the thing is, you compare it to a phone, people stand in line to spend $1,000 on the newest, latest and greatest iPhone. Do you need to have that? No. Is it nice? Do some people, want to have that? Yeah, absolutely. And Apple and everybody else is trying to fill that void. So, we as farmers, we don't need to toot our own horn if we meet consumers and provide what they want. They're willing to pay for it, so we don't need to shame them into thinking that they need to buy or go one way when they're willing to pay for what they want.
Yeah, so you're bringing up a different point, but it's a very relevant one because we think in ag, we tend to be a bit conservative or even cheap ourselves. And we think that that's all that matters to the consumer. The consumer, as you pointed out, is walking out of the Apple store where they stood in line to pay $1,000 for a handheld device that their other one did just fine. If you
Yeah,
say, I need a new
nothing wrong
phone,
with it.
what do you mean? You need a new phone. Does your current cell phone not work? No, it works. Does it not have internet connection? No, it has internet connection. What's it? Well, it doesn't have as good of a camera. Like, as good of a camera, it's a phone. It doesn't have as fast of download speed. It doesn't have, and you're saying, wait a minute. Again, that's the same concept with the consumer. You're saying, why are you going in there to Whole Foods and paying double price for that gallon of organic grass-fed milk that you could get conventional milk for? Or why are you going over there and paying, a 60% premium for organic strawberries? And it's because they can. It's
Yeah.
because they
Yep.
want to, right? And
Yep.
so we're still here sometimes saying educate the consumer. I'm not against telling you that a lot of things about, say organic produce are somewhat marketing myth more than reality, but I also am willing to let those consumers go and buy that stuff, whatever it is, just like you should be willing to let them, ain't everybody wants the grasshopper. Isn't that the phone that, or the cricket or whatever it is? They advertise like to old people that it's just
Oh,
a
yeah.
simple old
Yeah.
flip phone. Like, hey, grandpa, you don't even have a cell phone. Let's get you the cricket or whatever it is. It's just a simple old flip phone with numbers that are about the size of a quarter. That's fine for grandpa, but the consumer is going to stand in line to get the more expensive one. Talking about educate the consumer here with my man Andy Ambriole, and I got another couple of thoughts on this. It sounds condescending, it sounds arrogant to do it. We agree on that. We agree that the consumer has a lot of choices, and that's not a bad thing. But you know what? That's fantastic. I said in my article that I wrote, it's time to flip the script, change the curriculum. We should still do outreach, but what's the right way to do it? I don't think it's in the educate the consumer, which means a reactionary rallying cry to here's why we do what we do. I think it might be time to change how we do it. So, what's the right answer? You said that there's a considerable amount of, so we say, disconnect between what the consumer does and what we do. What's the right way to go about it?
I think just offering choices in the marketplace. We are so fortunate to live in the time that we do, where there is an abundance instead of scarcity. And the more choices, I think the better off everybody's going to be. So we'll let the marketplace kind of decide and uh, fight out the ideas there instead of legislatively or kind of within our own bubbles.
Sometimes we, and this is a real thing that we talked about in our Business of Agriculture Success group meeting that we had today, Andy. Sometimes when we talk about educating, there is another reason for it. As long as it's not just defending our inability to change, it's still okay that we're talking about putting information out there, but we do it in the wrong way. Now, our friend Todd talked about the three ways that consumers, so if we are really talking about an informational campaign or outreach to the people that we feed, and again, thank a farmer and y'all just be happy we produced this for you, ain't gonna fly anymore because there's a lot of choices, and consumer, certainly the ones that vote and vote with their dollars, are not so desperate that they just have to wait at the end of the bread line.
Yep.
Todd talked
Actually,
about, huh?
if you're really wanting to narrow it down, I'd say probably thank a trucker more than thank a farmer when it comes to getting food.
Yeah, yeah, because of our vast amounts of supply chain and distribution system.
Yep, yep.
So Todd Thurman talked about the three rhetorical appeals: the one that appeals to authority, one that appeals to logic, and the one that appeals to emotion. So what did you think of that? And then what do you think we're doing wrong in ag when it comes to how we outreach to consumers?
Yeah, I think it's great that he broke it down like that. And the one thing that he didn't really mention that I think is still very valid is the authority that farmers do have. There is a lot. You read the surveys. Um, a lot of consumers trust farmers. They will trust what a farmer says and all that. Now, when it goes to scientists or food companies or things like that, that trust goes down quite a bit. So we as farmers definitely can strive as an authority figure. He also mentioned emotional, and that is definitely a big one as well. Probably trumps authority because people like to feel good when they eat food. There is an emotional connection to that food that is deep within all of us. It's more than just shoving your face full with a Big Mac and
Yeah, there's
fries.
there's the sustenance part of it, but if you're of a certain age, you remember that there was a saying, and it's probably improper now: the way to a man's heart is through his
Yeah,
stomach. So you feed him, and then he falls in love with you. So there is an emotional part of it. To back this up a little bit, since we're talking about changing the curriculum, because what we're really saying is this old school idea that we just need to tell consumers how damn lucky they are that we exist. I just don't think it's going to work anymore. Like I said, we keep going to the smartphone example. You've got Samsung and you've got multiple other offerings. So the idea that there's a smartphone company and we should just be damn lucky they're there, well, not so much anymore. There's all kinds of options. It's kind of the same way with food. There's so many options. So when I think about an informational aspect and what I attempt to do with my outreach, I live half the year in the suburbs. I go straight to choice. Isn't it great you have all these choices?
yep,
Um, yeah. Todd's point today was about authority, logic, and emotion being the three rhetorical appeals. And to make sure the listener understands this, you can go back and find my Do Business Better podcast episode from last week or 2 weeks ago, depending on when you're listening to this. And it's called the three rhetorical appeals, or something like that. Authority really means credibility. And Andy has a lot of credibility as a farmer. I presumably have a lot of credibility as an ag guy. I've written books about it, and I've been in the industry my whole life, and I speak on the subject. Logic would be, well, here's why this is, and this, and then there's emotion, of course. Our detractors use the emotional because they know that gets folks to tune in or gets people's attention. PETA uses emotion. When they put a model in a bikini in a hog crate, they are using that to create an emotion, not to mention attention. We use logic. The problem when we use logic, Andy, is
Nobody really cares that there is that disconnect. Nobody cares that you only use 16 ounces of Roundup and you can spray 100 acres an hour. That a consumer cannot relate to that, and so they don't care. And you can talk about facts back and forth, but at the end of the day, it's just a disconnect.
yeah. So the other part of it is using logic is it doesn't largely work when it comes to what we're talking about. It using science, which I've pointed out forever. Remember, I'm the one that came up with the bumper sticker, agriculture because starvation sucks. That was a real appeal to, hey, what's the alternative? You want to bash agriculture. Well, what's the alternative? Going without. So emotion moves the needle more than logic. Before we go to the next subjects, I want to talk about all the ag things that I've seen that are, shall I say, outdated in terms of how we do consumer outreach. But before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Harvest Profit, company founded by Nick Horeb, now part of John Deere. Doesn't matter. You can just go to harvestprofit.com and find the software solution that's going to work for your farm or ag enterprise as hard as you work. Harvestprofit.com. You can get a free 14-day trial and see if this software is going to help you. All right.
It even works on organic farms too.
What's
Trust
that?
me, I know. It even works on organic farms too. Trust me, I know.
Are you a customer?
I am, yeah.
That's
For about a
fantastic.
little over a year now. So, yeah.
So Andy's been a customer of Harvest Profit, and he's very happy with the product. So good there. There you go. So if you need software, go get it. All right. So I talked about my article. 53% of the United States population considers themselves to be a foodie. And we didn't even use this term 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The wine and cheese thing, we started calling them foodies, and these people that go to, culinary trips and all that. Well, the thing is, if over half the population has an intense interest in food, which is what the definition of a foodie is, and we're the providers of that, instead of us making it sort of at odds, we ought to just continue to be in unison. We know that the foodies aren't PETA members trying to, shut us down, or they're not environmental wackos that are, chaining themselves to trees or whatever. So if that's the case, we got a real opportunity here. And I think the issue more and more, as you said, is meeting them where they are and just continually giving them the big push that you can have whatever you want. You can have whatever you want. And isn't it amazing? You can have whatever you want. I like that. What I don't like is tell your story. This is a consumer outreach thing that we've been hearing now for a decade. And every person with a social media account is thinking that, well, if I just tell them my story, consumers care about themselves. They care about that emotion. But your story may or may not appeal to them. There's a picture of my farm with round bales out in the meadow and all that's cool. It does create a little bit of emotion, but my story only matters to the consumer if it also makes it something about them, because people care about themselves. Am I right?
Absolutely. Go to the used car lot, and that's all. That experience is all about making that person feel comfortable, feel excited about the purchase, and all that. You don't know anything about the guy trying to sell you the car. You don't care about making his life easy. You want to know about all the new features on this car that's gonna drive itself or do whatever, or the heated seats and all that. Like you said, people care about themselves, and we as farmers need to communicate how what we do can benefit them,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
Yeah, what's it do for them? Now, for instance, you're an organic, and that does tell a story, but it's not necessarily about you. Now, if they put a picture of you up and your wife and your cute kids, and everybody thinks that's neat because, oh, I'm supporting this sort of vision of what I want my food to come from. I don't want it to come from, a foreign country or whatever. That's all fine because it goes back to the consumer sentiment. It satisfies what they want. Your story basically then ties into what they want to be a part of. They want to be part of a food system that has a person like you that does their food, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's kind of the draw to the local food movement, and yeah, foodies and all that.
So, what do we get right? Because people think I'm bashing on ag sometimes when I point these things out. What do we get right when it comes to consumer outreach?
Uh, in my opinion, very few things. You look at a lot of the, especially from the checkoff dollars and things like that. It's very self-serving. You'll see the national corn and soybean ads in farm magazines, and we as farmers think they're really cool, but show them to your next door neighbor that has a couple kids and works in town, and they're like, what? It doesn't register at all. So I think the nostalgia, people still are attracted to that, and I think ag does a very good job, sometimes overwhelming at times, holding on to that. But as far as trying to connect with the average family next door, uh, in my opinion, it's done very poorly and needs a lot of improvement.
Okay, so you bring up a couple of things, and I don't disagree when it comes to educating the consumer. Um, I've got a billboard campaign that I did in Georgia for my client, the Georgia milk people, and the signs said "nut milk is not milk," and it created a big stir. We got boatloads of action on social media, and people are taking pictures of these black and white boards that say "nut milk is not milk." Of course, we're playing off of alliteration, and you're playing off of sort of a drawing a line in the sand, a rallying cry, if you will. Yeah, you know what? That darn old. That's why I like real milk. That was kind of the concept, but it's a checkoff campaign that some people in the industry don't like. And the thing is, they want stuff like you just said, in terms of informing the consumer, that does inform the consumer and it creates an emotion with the consumer.
Yep.
Some of the people in dairy don't like it because, well, first off, sounds like you might be disparaging nut milk. I'm like, you yourselves said there's not really a thing called nut milk, it's nut juice. So I'm just pointing out what is and what is not disparaging, just pointing out what is and what is not. And also, we are going out to where the consumer is driving down the highway versus reading a farm magazine. So your point is dead on that sometimes we think, well, you know what, they're doing a good job. They're doing outreach. Yeah, to you.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
not your own customer. You are
We're
not your
only
own
two
customer.
percent. We're only 2%. So it just
Yeah, like you said, the neighbor has never read a copy of Indiana Corn Grower, so therefore they're never going to see the ad that the Indiana Corn Checkoff program put in there. So it's about meeting the consumer where they are with that. I think another thing that we do, and I've talked about a lot on this podcast, when it comes to informational campaigns, again, we go overboard on science and logic, and the consumer is probably a little bit swayed by that. I think you've got to have emotion backed with data, emotion backed with, I think it's got to be like a 75-25. Get them to feel emotionally vested and then give them some information. What do you think?
yeah, I think that's probably a good mix. And yeah, at the end of the day, uh, facts aren't always exactly black and white. It's whoever's paid to do the research, whoever's paying for the research. There's several instances of that. So, and that gets pretty tribal back and forth. Like Todd was talking about, let's connect on some higher ground other than this is what my scientist says versus what your scientist says.
All right, you talked about an educational, ag outreach that we do, and we're talking about what we do right and what we do wrong. Nostalgia. You said we do a good job of that. Yeah, we do. Now, here's the thing. That sometimes backfires because then the people that are my neighbors out here in Paradise Valley, Arizona, are saying, well, you know what? I want my food to come from a place where there's a red barn and a little clay silo, and there's gonna be 4 cows out there, and there's gonna be some chickens, because we still play that up too much. So when you say nostalgia, there is the backside of that where then it's got this concept. Like I said, if Ford wants to sell you an F-150, they might show you an old Ford pickup truck, and then they'll fast forward it right to today, and they'll say, "Always been there for you, Ford tough." They don't say, "Oh, here's this 1973 Ford pickup truck." Then that what you want? because when we keep showing yesterday's agriculture as nostalgia, sometimes our customer then thinks that that's what it should still be.
Yep, and that's one of our main jobs that we need to educate. Not this isn't 1950. We're not all out on 8Ns and farm all M's and all that. We need to portray the modern farm, but do it in a way that connects to the consumer and tell the story that they will find interesting, not toot our own horn, and you know that way.
I talked about it in my book, the peril of the cheap food argument. That's been another thing that we've done.
Yep.
Sometimes what we do when we think we're educating our consumer base is we talk then about how inexpensive the food product is. I'm like, wait a minute, is that education or is that just promoting? And then I always say, well, why are you promoting your cheapness? Because generally that means that the cheaper things go, the lower your margins are in business. Is that educating, or is that just still an outdated method of us telling the consumer something that they really don't care about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a fairly significant segment out there that price shops, and I think it's important to keep that segment alive and well. But at the same time, when we look at it as a business, what other business wants to constantly cut their own margins,
Mm.
and not offer? Yeah, Ford, they've got several models of the F-150. It everybody wants the tricked out, decked out version, and that's the one they want to sell you, but everybody can't afford that. So, we need to have all kinds of options and not just close the door, especially when people are willing to pay for the uh, platinum edition or whatever it is. So,
Yeah, it seems as though when we call educating consumer, then we go right to look how cheap your food is, and
yeah,
that is a language that you and I are both from a county that has a significant amount of blue collar people that are even some welfare folks. So a cheap food argument works to the lower socioeconomic end of our food consumer spectrum. But if you go over here to Paradise Valley, Arizona, and keep telling them how cheap their food is, a couple of people that might work with, but in general, they don't
yeah.
care.
It's almost an insult. They don't want cheap cars. They don't want cheap houses. They don't want cheap anything, let alone do they want cheap food. You look at the restaurants and everything else, everybody wants to be in the high end, not
Yeah.
not the McDonald's.
Yeah, you
So
used the F-150 from the base model to the platinum model. There's even a greater disparity if you think about it. We call consumer outreach and educating consumer by telling them how cheap their food is. I've got neighbors over here that they want the F-150 platinum, and we're still when you keep telling them how cheap we can make stuff for them, they're like, "Are you expecting me to take the bus?"
yeah,
We're
yeah,
not only between F-150s, we're between the most expensive pickup truck and going down to riding the public bus, and that tends to be wrong. There's a couple things that I think we do a good job of, and I think it's getting better when it comes to educating the consumer. And this is the where I focus, and this is where I think that you probably do too. You're an organic guy. Some of the organic marketing claims at the grocery consumer level are a little bit, shall we say, exaggerated in terms of health claims. But on an environmental claim, I think that all of modern agriculture today has a real good uh, story to tell that is about the consumer. Right now, we've got so much adherence to this politically and otherwise. That's what I think we should probably be putting out there. We're talking about educating the consumer. I think it should always be about environment and environmental benefit by our techniques.
yeah, and
Right? Is that the right one?
yeah. I mean, that story is told fairly often, and nobody wants to live in a dirty environment. Nobody wants dirty water, dirty air. That's an easy thing to connect with people on, and I think it's important to tell the story of how we're doing that. Whether you want to support a no-till farm operation that doesn't disturb the soil but still uses chemicals, or you want to support an organic operation that does a little bit of tillage but doesn't use any chemicals or anything like that. Uh, there's different ways to achieve the same goal and to market to different consumers that have different preferences. So
Yeah. Now you say that it's being told a lot. I think it's being told maybe by the ag corporations. I don't know that it's being told as much by our trade groups as perhaps should be, because that's where, uh, like you talked about a trade group putting an ad in a publication that only you are going to see. What if they were out there doing more stuff that the general market saw about? Do you realize that today to produce a bushel of corn, we use 1/4 as much resources as we did, in 1940? That kind of thing, because then it becomes a bit of a logical but an emotional appeal, because I think you can do a real simple thing. You can show the Dust Bowl and you can show today. And that's probably a good one. What else am I missing here, man? Educating the consumer, consumer outreach, informational campaigns. We talked about the 3 rhetorical appeals, talked about what we do wrong, talked about how it was time to change the script. What am I missing, Andy?
Well, we didn't talk about, what was it, the original Greek language of that. I don't remember. So, other than that, I think we covered a pretty big gamut of everything. So,
The Greek language be that we talk about the was it who was it that came up with the who was the actual person that came up with this, the father of logic, if you will. But anyway, appeals to authority, logic, and emotion were what we discussed, and how our educational outreach, as we call it, to consumers really falls flat because it is all about the logic and the science and logic and the science. By the way, the 3: authority, logic, and emotion are uh, uh, pathos, legos, and egos. Isn't that it? Ergos.
one of them was locos, wasn't it? I don't know. I
I
don't
think it's
speak.
logos. Yeah, I think it's pathos, logos, and ergos or egos. But anyway, it sounds like egos, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, um, I'd say that why does this matter? If you're in the business of agriculture, you're listening to this right now, you've heard this 100 times. Every time you've been at a conference, be careful of falling for this thing of we just have to educate the consumer, because a lot of times it's we just got to tell them why we let hog manure go down their rivers, or why we why we do this, because sometimes it's a reactionary defense versus an actual uh, outreach to the consumer. And remember, we're a consumer business. I mean, Andy gets as much as anybody. He started out selling pumpkins when he was a 12-year-old. So we're a consumer business. Without them, there's no need for us. Even though we say you can't live without food, well, we don't have a business without them. So it's a very interdependent arrangement we have.
Yep. And I mean, business is in place to serve your customer. I mean, that's kind of a business 101 thing. So we need to educate and serve, but not replace serve with educate. And, so
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable thing. We'll just say it again. We need to replace.
uh, we need to serve and educate both, but not replace serving with educating.
Yeah, yeah, because sometimes it's a sort of a rallying or thing of saying, "By God, this is what we're going to do, and before we do it." All right, his name's Andy Ambriole. You can keep up with him. He's on Twitter. He fights with people all the time. What's your handle?
At BioSteward. So
Bio Steward.
when
And
sometimes we get into some creative discussions, so we can still all be friends at the end of the day, though. So
how many acres are you going to have in the year 2021 that you're cultivating?
about 1,400. So
And it's what crops?
corn, soybeans, wheat. So
All organic. And
all
then
organic.
and he's looking at other future options and alternatives. All right. So now you've heard our thoughts on this. It's time to change the curriculum. And yes, do keep doing outreach. Just realize you're doing it probably you need to be doing it the right way, appealing to emotion, appealing to them. And if your story doesn't mean something to the customer, it doesn't mean anything, period, because your story is neat for you, but it's not to them until it actually means something to their life. That's kind of the wrap on all that. This episode of the Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Harvest Profit, a software solution that works for guys just like Andy Ambriole, who's my guest on this podcast. So if it works for him, a 1,400-acre organic farmer, why are you not giving it a try? Because it doesn't matter what you farm. It doesn't matter what your ag enterprise is. Harvest Profit is a great option for you. Please do me a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, push this along to somebody that needs to hear it. Until next time, Andy, thanks for being on. It's getting dark where he is. If you're
Yeah, it's
watching
getting dark.
this,
it's about time to sign off. I think I'm just about a shadow now.
yeah, he's just about a shadow against a winter scene there in northern Indiana. All right, till next time. Thanks for being here, Andy.
Yep. Take care.
Till next time, it's the Business of Agriculture.